Welcome everyone to our 10th annual Latina Education Summit sponsored by the Chicano Studies Research Center and the UCLA Graduate School of Education and Information Studies. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. Buenos dias. I'm sure glad this day is finally here. It's so nice to see all of you. As folks were coming in, I've heard that there are people who've driven from up north, Central Valley, Los Angeles, Las Vegas. We have a group up here representing Las Vegas to come to share this day with us. And I just wanted to say thank you to all of you who have come to this event to have some engaging discussions around the Latino educational pipeline. I'll keep my comments brief. My name is Dr. Lindsay Pérez and I'm co-coordinator along with Dr. Carlos Haro, who's hiding in the back. And we've worked on what we think is going to be a really amazing day of researchers, of scholars, of students who are working, engaging in discussions about how to improve the Latino educational pipeline. So I wanted to give you just a little bit of context about this event. This is our 10th annual, but actually began more than a decade ago at a convening at Chon's house, Chon Noriega, the director of CSRC, with a couple of faculty members at the UCLA Graduate School of Education, and also Mónica García, who is going to be one of our panelists here in our opening panel, along with Dr. Dani Solórzano, Carlos Haro, of course, Chon, Concepcion, Dr. Concepcion Valdez, who is also a faculty member in the Department of Education, as well as, someone can help me, there was an attorney from MALDEF also there. Victor Viramontes, okay. So this was in 2003, I believe, and these were the initial discussions. This was really where the ideas of this Latino Education Summit annual conference was born. So fast forward to 2003, I was a graduate student here at UCLA in the Department of Education, working with Dani Solórzano. And it was actually before I started working with Dani, I knew I was coming to this program. I had just moved to Los Angeles, and it was the first time since I was about 14 years old that I didn't have a job, coming to a new city and starting a graduate program. And so I remember thinking about, okay, I need to find a job. I also was a parent. My daughter was 1 year old at the time. And so I felt pretty desperate to find something. And so I came to campus and I thought, okay, I'm gonna print out my resume and find the Chicano Latino Ethnic Studies Center somewhere on this campus. And so I did a search on the UCLA website and I found the Chicano Studies Research Center, and reading through the site, it seemed like an amazing place. So I printed out my resume, which was probably a little less than up to par at the time, and I brought it with me. I walked into the center, and I just happened to run into Dr. Carlos Haro, who was the assistant director at the time, and he just happened to be in the main office. So I handed him this resume. I said, I just started a graduate program here. I'm in the Department of Education. I see that some of the work that the center does. Here's my resume. Is there anything that I can do for you? And he looked at it and he said, sure, come next week. So it was this moment where that opportunity, the opportunity that Dr. Carlos Haro had given me that day, started what is now a more than a decade relationship with the center. That was about 2004 that I walked into the CSRC. And so since, we have begun discussions and thinking about what we want this conference to look like. Our first annual conference was in 2006, and this is our 10th annual event. And so I have to acknowledge Dr. Carlos Haro, who has really been the person to drive and make sure that these education summits happen every year and that we have these fruitful discussions every year. So thank you, Dr. Carlos Haro, for taking a chance on me and for always being dedicated to making sure that these conferences happen every year. So thank you. I wanted to take a moment to just give you a round of applause. Gracias, Carlos. So I'd like to introduce the director of the Chicano Studies Research Center, who is always have been so supportive of this event, Dr. Chon Noriega. His bio is in, it's actually, I think, a bio that doesn't quite do him justice, that's in this program. But this is Dr. Noriega's 14th year here with the center as the director, really leading the center into new and exciting directions over the past decade plus. So Dr. Noriega is a professor in the UCLA Department of Film, Television, and Media. He's a prolific writer, so he's written over close to, I think, 10, 15 books. Since 1996, he's also been the editor of Aztlan, which is the Journal of Chicano Studies. He's curated numerous exhibitions in museums across the country. His awards include Getty Postdoc Fellowship in Art of History. He's a Rockefeller Foundation Film, Video, and Multimedia Fellow, and an Anne Rosenfield Distinguished Community Partner Prize. And so with that,
I want to thank you all for coming out here, being a part of the event this day. And in my introductions, I want to start with the fact that technically I'm not here. I am on sabbatical this quarter, which means that I am relieved from both teaching and administrative duties. So I have every right to be playing hooky. And yet here I am, and I'm here for two reasons. And I'll go through each of these reasons. But first I want to just acknowledge that the person who is acting director right now, Charlene Villaseñor-Black, is also here. I think you're still here, right, Charlene? I'm here. There you are, because I'm going to call you up later. And Lindsay had mentioned that I've been the editor of Aztlan, a journal of Chicano studies, since 1996. Actually, I will be stepping down early in the winter, and Charlene will be taking over as the new director. I figure 15 years was enough, and it's actually been 20. So it's time to bring in somebody that will bring new energy, new ideas to it, and really continue the 45, 46-year legacy now of the journal as a major platform for multi as well as interdisciplinary work, that we get submissions from all fields and we don't filter that down. This is really a place where people working on research related to the Chicano experience can find a kind of rigorously reviewed outlet for that work. So I'm glad to have her taking over. Now, the first reason I'm here is the importance of this topic, education. And when I first became director and we're looking around figuring, well, we can't do everything, even though we have a comprehensive mission at the center. Where do we need to really put an emphasis? And we settled on education, partly because by that point I had hired Carlos Otto as an assistant director, his second tour of duty at the center. The first one was in the 70s. And that was where he got his PhD. But also in looking around the university, we really only found one department where you could expect to see more than one or two Chicano faculty members, and that was education. And we had played a role, the center had played a role in the 70s with the appointment of Concepcion Valadez as the first. So it made sense to pull those people together, Chris Gutierrez, Concepcion, Danny, and have a discussion about what was needed. And as Lindsay pointed out, it ended up in my Echo Park dining room with a table that went out into the hallway, and with people that we had been able to convince to come there because something like this had never happened. Where you get the people doing the research, with the people that are there on the front lines with the political end of education, and those with the administrative end, and those, like a lot of us are teaching, we're also on the ground. And to just have that discussion of what could really help, because we are facing a very unique situation that's now kind of norm for most larger cities, which is nearly 3/4 of the kids in the public schools were Latino, most of those Mexican descent, and yet you wouldn't say that the policy reflected that, and really took into account some of the very particular needs and also some of the very particular assets that these students brought to the educational arena. So we did team up with LAUSD. We had Jose Huiza, Mónica García was there. We had the Montebello School District, and we had the top two people there, Maggie Mejia, and forget the guy that replaced her when she left for the Bay Area, but and MOLDEF as well. and kind of really talked it through and came up with what became the outlines for the Education Summit. Now, the idea behind it is it's really a place where people can meet, and we've really, through Carlos's leadership, tried to make that as broad as possible. So it's not just the folks kind of taking the bird's eye view, whether it's from the political side, the administrative side, or from academic research, but also the people on the ground, including students, families, community groups, advocacy groups, that are really trying to push the ball forward and improve the opportunities. We came up with this idea that Danny kind of brought to us in terms of the pipeline. And just looking in the Los Angeles area, you'd have to say that there were more leaks than there were kind of the ability to move water through, as it were, where you go from 75% down to about 1/8 of that by the time you get to UCLA. And that didn't seem right for what should be the flagship public university in this region that is really addressing, in many fundamental ways, the needs of the region. And not just through the research, but through the training of the next generation. So in doing that, we've had a number of institutional partners that have been very critical. This couldn't be something we did on our own or with a handful of faculty. And from the start, we've had the support of the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies, the School of Law, as well as MALDEF. And this year, we're grateful to have the co-sponsorship of the UCLA Institute of American Cultures, which when we started was a granting arm of the Ethnic Studies Centers, and now it's our administrative hub. And we have our own vice provost. So this is an improvement that has happened in terms of the structuring within the university. But also UCLA Student Affairs and the UCLA Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, which again didn't exist until this fall. And is also a result of pushes by African American, Asian American, Chicano, Latino, and American Indian faculty to say, we really need to take a look at what's happening to the faculty on this campus. Because without them, and without them having support, you're going to be hard-pressed to serve well the students that you're trying to open up to in order to diversify. As I mentioned, we've had participation by faculty. Danny, Lindsay has been there from the start as a student, and now as a professor, Robert Chao Romero, and others. But I'd also like to acknowledge the staff at the center who really in many ways make this possible and will ensure that even though you may forget, this name tag will get you to lunch when you head over to the where we're eating. But really make possible events like this on a day-to-day basis, and not just the making them happen, but making them known more broadly in terms of putting out the scholarship. We're live streaming right now, and on the communications and community partnership side. So that includes in the back there, Connie Heskett, who's in the back, Rebecca Epstein. We hire a lot of Rebeccas. Rebecca Frazier, who's not here right now, Andrea Vargas, Michael Stone at the camera, and Darling. Darling Sienna is back there. And so I want to give them all a round of thanks as well as the faculty. So that's all reason one. Now, reason two has to do with the person who really took the charge and developed it and has brought us to this point 10 years later, and that's Carlos Otto. And he was a lifesaver for me because I came in as a new director. Needless to say, there's always politics, and I didn't quite understand all of them. So I got somebody who'd gotten his butt kicked the first go round, the first 10 years of the center. And he was very helpful in educating me to how one reads what happens within institutions. For a lot of us who are first generation into college, and sometimes we're the first generation into a professional arena, you don't have that as a background. Your parents weren't able to say, here's how you navigate through higher education, here's how you navigate through a law firm, here's how you navigate through a corporate office. And without that, you're learning things for the first time, and you're often learning them without other people there that have had your experience and can mentor you. And so it's really important to be able to have that ability to learn how to read, because you're likely not to respond in the way you would if you didn't have that, which is to be a little more reactive and a little more angry because things aren't going your way, and nobody supporting you. So I have to say personally, he was very helpful with me on that, and I was trying to think of the ways to acknowledge that, and I realized I could tell you all about the conferences he's done besides the Ed Summits and all of that. The fact that all of the projects, like everything we do, he has really made sure there was an archival component, a scholarship component, and a community engagement component. That we aren't just doing a conference, we're really making sure it has a broad impact. And I thought the only way I could do that was in song. And so, Carlos, could you come up here? I want to sing you a song. Come on up, Carlos, you got to do it. I did ask for the coat because I miscalculated. I was basing it on Danny. I was like, Danny's not going to wear a coat today. Guy shows up with the jacket. So. All right, Carlos, I'm going to try my best. I'm not really known for singing, but this is also coming by way of Hilda Solis, County Supervisor for Los Angeles. And it's actually a commendation. So, Carlos Manuel Otto, Assistant Director Emeritus, honoree, the 10th Annual CSRC Latina Education Summit. And I'm going to read the rest. Okay, Carlos. In recognition of dedicated service to the affairs of the community and for the civic pride demonstrated by numerous contributions for the benefit of all citizens of Los Angeles, November 6th, 2015, Hilda Solis, Supervisor, 1st District.
Now I can sit?
Now you can sit.
Thank you.
So, Carlos, it's a small token of thanks. The staff made sure we're able to present to you, and all by way of saying, you don't get to retire yet. So, I'd like to briefly introduce our next speaker, our co-organizer. I'll say that when I realized that in that packet I just gave Carlos were the last 4 pages of my introduction, so I will have to just go with the first page. But we've always had a great working relationship with the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies. It's been an extreme pleasure to have Marcelo Suarez-Orozco as the dean. He's now entering his 4th year as dean, as the Wasserman dean, and also as a distinguished professor of education. And his research interest and the incredible output associated with those interests align very well with what we're doing and actually help us in pushing beyond the more national and regional focus we've had. Because he focuses on cultural psychology and psychological anthropology with an emphasis on globalization, mass migration, and education. You'll get a more proper introduction to him in the program, and Carlos Otto, he promises not to sing this one, but he'll be introducing Marcelo at the lunch keynote that he'll be giving. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome up Marcelo Suarez-Orozco.
Thank you, Chon. Thank you so much. Buenos dias. Thank you. Chon, where did you get those glasses? I mean,
Do we have the same one?
I got mine in Brooklyn. I don't know where you got yours, but anyway, they look great.
LAI work.
It looks great. Look great. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm so delighted. I'm so proud. I'm so happy to be a small part of this extraordinary gathering. As Chon was speaking, I'm thinking now we have them all. We have Noriega and Noriega, and one letter tells the whole story, right? I'm so happy. GSCNIS, of course, home of the great luminaries in the field of Latino education. My colleague, my advisor, my friend, Dani Solórzano, of course, Carlos, thank you so much. Thank you for your work. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for the legacy that you've given us. And Lindsay, thank you for playing such an amazing role. GSCNIS is especially happy to be a part of this very special 10th year anniversary conference. This for us at UCLA is a time to celebrate 10 years of scholarly work on broad topics relating to Latino education. It is a time to pause, and it's a time to reflect on the challenges, on the battles moving forward. The topics we've engaged over the decade, from Latinos in community college, to undocumented Latino AB 540 students, tell a story of a broad intellectual vision, a dedication to a kind of engaged scholarship that is driven by a muscular connection between research and practice, all animated by what really is a UCLA signature, the ethic of care, the spirit of social justice in the work we do. This year we return to a foundational theme, a theme that Dani and so many others have done so much to develop. The Latina education pipeline, learned lessons and sites of possibilities. The topic is an urgent topic. And let me highlight why. The United States is witnessing two unprecedented, pharaohic formations, monumental new formations. First, the breathtaking growth of the Latino school population nationwide at a time of new levels of inequality that are now surpassing all previous historic records. At a time when more is asked of education than ever before in human history, growing inequality, and our unfinished business, educating all Latinas, all Latinos to their great potential, threaten our economic vitality, our social cohesion, and our most fundamental democratic ideals. Let me be clear, given our demography moving forward, without a bright Latina and Latino education future, there is no bright American future. Let me highlight the importance of this topic. The Holy Father, Francisco, has identified the issue of the education, the well-being, the fundamental protections due to immigrant and minority children all over the world, a numero uno priority. I'm honored beyond words to announce that I will be joining the Holy Father again next week in the Vatican for a high-level summit on these issues. This is an issue very near and dear to the Holy Father's heart. His first two sentences to Barack Obama in the White House were, "Thank you, Mr. President. I am the child of immigrants. I'm happy to be in the country built by immigrants." I'm quoting the Holy Father. GSCNIS is proud of our partnership over the decade with our colleagues at the UCLA Chicano Studies Research Center, as well as the many scholars, practitioners of goodwill, students who have contributed to Latino education over this last monumental decade. The topic of our 10th convening is near and dear to GSCNIS. Education and information studies are deeply ingrained in the DNA of UCLA. From the founding in 1882 of the Los Angeles branch of the state normal school, the second normal school in the state. First one was up north, and that became San Jose State. We became UCLA. From the founding in 1882 of the normal school in an orange grove, now the site of the Los Angeles Public Library, to 1919, when the state normal school officially became, and this was our baptismal name, the southern branch of the University of California, Berkeley. Amazing, those folk up there.
Of Anaheim.
To the globally renowned UCLA of today, education and information studies have been at the center of the university's evolution. We are the DNA of UCLA. We are the mitochondrial. We are the nucleic acid. We are the Eve. Without us, there would be no UCLA. UCLA and Los Angeles grew together. Let me try a hypothesis with you. Each city gets the university it deserves. In the 21st century, Los Angeles is the vibrant, brilliant, pulsating global city at the edge of the great rising civilizations of Asia Pacific and Latin America. LA is not so much a city of neighborhoods as New York, as much a city of nations. The great Thomas Jefferson once said, we all have two cities. We all have two cities, our own and Paris. Let me say this, in the 21st century, many countries in the world have two capitals, their own and LA. We are this world's second capital. From Armenia to El Salvador, from Mexico to Iran, from Guatemala to Cambodia, LA now has the second largest number of citizens originating in nearly 20 different countries. We are the other Armenia, the other Cambodia, the other El Salvador, the other Korea, the other Mexico, the other Guatemala, the other El Salvador. And today, we live better, we eat better, we have better music, Professor Noriega, because LA is this amazing city of nations. UCLA is the university LA deserves. I'm delighted to give a warm welcome to our distinguished panelists, our friends. I hope you enjoy your sojourn at UCLA. Bienvenidos, felicidades. I will be back for the comida at lunch, at noon, and I will share with you more substantial reflections on the nexus between migration, inequality, and education in the 21st century. Muchas gracias. Buenos días.
We have one more speaker who's been with us from the start, and for many of the previous 9 was the faculty sponsor working with Carlos Otto, and that's Daniel G. Solorzano, who's a professor of social science and comparative education. And Danny's done a lot of the research with his students, and if you look at the publications that have come out of this, he's always sharing the limelight. He's also mentoring students into the research process, the publication process. And I think it's an important aspect of the work that he's done and that we're trying to do through the Education Summit. One of the areas he's focusing on, that he's written about with the policy brief that we have for this conference, is racial microaggressions and other forms of everyday racism. And I just want to put that in the context of being that he's very mindful of the fact that a lot of times we're dealing with macroaggressions as well. And that gets perhaps more of the public scrutiny or attention. And it's important to really balance these in terms of really understanding what's happening in society. Now, in terms of the emphasis on diversity, it's not just through the research. Danny's walk the walk. He's the Associate Dean of Equity and Diversity and the Chief Diversity Officer in the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies. And he's also the director of the UC All-Campus Consortium on Research for Diversity. And I think he's had that position for, what, about 4 years now?
I'll update you in a second.
A long time, okay. But what I want to end with is, we know he's an education professor, but he also walks the walk in teaching, and in 2007 was awarded the campus's Distinguished Teacher Award. And so with that, I want to introduce Danny.
Just a bit of an update. I stepped down as Associate Dean of Equity and Diversity in September, and I turned it over to my colleague Tyrone Howard, who's now the Associate Dean. I agreed with Marcelo to do that for a year as that transition position. And UC Accord, unfortunately, the UC Office of the President didn't continue funding of UC Accord after 15 years. And so I'm no longer the director of UC Accord.
Okay.
But I was a part of that UC Accord for close to 14 years, 15 years, along with Jeannie Oakes, my colleague. I want to add my welcome. I'm just so excited to see you all here after 10 years. And again, just once again acknowledge Chon Noriega's, his vision, Carlos Otto's vision, Lindsay Pérez's vision of this summit over the last 10 years. So I want to recognize them as well. But Chon mentioned something about back in 2003 when we met at his house in Echo Park. He said that he looked to departments who had Latina and Latino faculty, and he looked to education as one of the few departments, unfortunately, here at UCLA, that for the last 15 years have had a growing number of both Latina and Latino faculty, Asian American faculty, and African American faculty. But just a quick story. I mean, when our dean, and I want to thank him for being here today and for his leadership, when our dean came here 4 years ago, or 3 years ago, he had negotiated 4 FTEs, 4 hires. All 4 of his hires had been people of color. 1 Afro-Latino, 1 Mexicana, 1 African-American, and 1 Asian-American. And so he continues, as a dean, walking the walk. And again, I think that's what leadership has to do. Again, it's really important that we continue to diversify our faculty and our student population here at UCLA. But as you all know, if you're not mindful of that in the ongoing, it's a continuous battle. If you're not mindful of it, you can easily slip back to the way things were 20 years ago here at UCLA, at least in our school. Right? When I got here 26 years ago, it was not as diverse, nowhere near as diverse as it is today, as a result of our leadership. And again, our leadership right now in our department, in our school, I should say, is our dean, Marcelo Suarez-Orozco. So thank you, Marcelo. A couple of things that I want to share with you. I also want to thank Marcelo Suarez-Orozco and the dean of the College of Education at Cal State Long Beach, Marquita Grenon Shire, who basically, I'm really thankful for this, they paid for the printing of the research report and the policy brief. And so we were actually not going to have it here. So thank you for that, and thank you for the dean at Cal State Long Beach for doing that. And that's really important. But what I want to do today, as we make our transition into the first panel, is to share just a couple of numbers with you, just to reinforce what Chon, Marcelo, and others have been saying. And so, let's see if we can get this. Okay, why is it not working? Okay, it should work now. 53%. For those who don't know, 53%, what that number means is that in the state of California today, right, if you looked at the percentage of the K through 12, the percentage of enrollments in K through 12 schools in the state of California, 53% are Latino, right? We're now a majority. We've been a majority now for at least 4 years, but that's an important number. The second number is 30th. If that 3.2 million Latino K through 12 students were a state, they'd be 30th between Connecticut and Iowa. That's how big this population is, right? Let's move to another segment. If 25% of all community college students in the country, 25% of all community college students in the country are in California. In California's 113 campuses. It's the largest system by far in the United States. Texas is second at about 70, 73. That's how big our California community college system is. 42%. What that represents, the head count as of this academic year, or last academic year, the head count at the community colleges, 42% of all community college students in the state of California are Latino. Right? We're now a plurality, meaning we're the largest group. I think whites are about 26%, so we far past the whites about a decade ago, actually. Right? Another number, 37%. 37% represents the percentage of undergraduate enrolled students at the California State University system, the CSU system, the largest public system, four-year public system in the country, with 23 campuses, right? In fact, we're getting close, Latinos are getting close to being, we are actually overtaken whites as the plurality in the California State University system. And then finally, 21%, and this is where we have to keep working. 21% represents the number of enrolled Latino students in the University of California, undergraduates, right? So these are some numbers I want to share with you today, through the day. I know I'm contextualizing to California, but my sense is that, these numbers can help us in our discussions as we move forward. But as we move forward, I also want to recognize that we're going to be dealing with some of these issues in each of these segments. And I hope everyone will be able to get I think I have and I should also say that all these numbers are going up. They're not going down. They're not flattened. They're all going up for many reasons that we can talk about throughout the day. And then finally, if we're going to talk about some of these issues, again, I hope every one of you were able to get the report that's out in the back and share it with folks. It's still falling through the cracks. Revisiting the Latino educational pipeline. Because in that, under Lindsay Pérez Huber's leadership, they put together a 16-page amazing report on the educational pipeline in all segments of the pipeline. For some of you, if you can't get it, it'll be available in PDF on Monday. And again, download it, share it with folks. Let's get that word out there. And so with that, I'm going to transition to the first panel. I'll start with, is Mónica here? Mm-hmm. Mónica García? Mónica García is she was at our first meeting back in 2003. And an amazing leader. She is, I think, probably the Latina educational leader, political leader in probably the state, if not the country. She's an amazing resource for us, always has been an amazing resource for us. She's been, Mónica, you're going to have to help me, how many years you've been on the LA? 10 years on the LA Unified School Board. LA Unified, as many of you know, is the second largest district in the country. And through her leadership, many things have been happening, some of which you'll be hearing about today. Our second, and her title of her presentation is A Culturally Relevant Curriculum in LAUSD, High School Ethnic Studies Requirements. Our second panelist is Lindsay Pérez Huber. Again, as you heard earlier, she's a professor of education at California State University, Long Beach. And the title of her presentation is Making Education Work for Latinas in the United States. And then finally, Maria Malagon is a professor of sociology at Cal State Fullerton, and the title of her presentation is Improving Education and Life Trajectories for Latino Boys. So I'm going to turn this over to the panel. And I think, Mónica, you're going to be first.
Oh, I am? Okay, great.
Good.
Buenos dias, buenos dias. So I have to thank you, Professor Solórzano, and I just tweeted out, thank you for your leadership. As a daughter of the East Side, I just celebrate that there is a person like Danny Solórzano giving his best every single day to make this world better. And so thank you. And to all of you, I have to first take a moment to just say thank you for keeping up the fight. I remember learning about Chicano studies at UC Berkeley, and I take that experience that semester where I earned a .045 GPA with me every day to work. And I remember Alex Zaragoza saying our mission is to destapar, because there's a lot of tapados. And he was talking to those of us in the room because we have to learn. So I bring with me the hunger of a community that wants an opportunity to learn. I bring with me the hunger of our young people who are looking for the adults in the system to address their needs. And I bring with me the request for all of you to continue to push and to ask the questions of why are so many left out. And I bring also optimism that together we are at a very important point that LA leads. The LA agenda is about the California agenda and about the American agenda. And that is true over and over and over. And while we started celebrating a decade of work here to focus on this population, in LA Unified, I am the third Latina in 155 years to be on the board. We have since elected 2 others that gave service, but our participation in this democracy is a lot of what this institute is about. Because when we cannot read and write, we cannot participate fully. And if we are to lead, then we ought to invest so that we can do the best we can. So our mission in LA Unified, where we are 74% Latino, is about getting to 100% graduation. And since the last time we met, we lost $2.7 billion in the Great Recession. And really, that set us back. From when I was a child, California was 7th in the nation in per pupil spending. We went down to 49th. We are now back at 33, but we are climbing our way out of an economic reality that very much impacted the kind of opportunity we can provide our youth. So in LA, big LA Unified, that's 530,000 young people. Maybe 30% of them are English language learners, 84% are children who qualify for free and reduced lunch, and 91% are children of color, okay? I bring you noticias that we have gone from 46% graduation to 70%. And this is an example of people are powerful. Our teachers and professors have stepped up, and we are a system that's transitioning. So the one that is dying, we couldn't afford it and it wasn't working for everyone. And we are growing something more modern, something that is about the classroom that keeps evolving, something that is about the world that is changing, and specifically around ethnic studies. Here is the good news. You have a Board of Education who endorsed that it should be a requirement, endorsed that by 2019, every high school student should have at least 1 semester to graduate, and yet we didn't fund it. The district told us that was going to be a $30 million investment. So I was reluctant to vote for it without voting for money, because I think that's a lie in budgeting. However, I embraced the energy that said, this is good and we should. The challenge for all of you is that we really don't know how, as a system, right? So when you mandate something, people are very good at checking the box. The notion of Chicano Latino studies that brings a political, economic, philosophical lens about change is the one that really is not, there's no meeting of the minds on that, right? So can I stand up and tell you about Mexicans and did I meet? What is that bar, right? But can I engage you in your reality? And I have a team that I'm very proud of. Roosevelt High School is present. And outside, and as we prepared for today, they shared with us how they are leading. So every 9th grader at Roosevelt High School takes a semester of Mexican American studies and then African American studies. And the theme there is Boyle Heights and me. And in Boyle Heights, that reminds us of struggle. So we are the district that has the best story of the kid lifting themselves out of poverty and overcoming all odds. And we have the story of just the challenge of how we don't meet our kids' needs. So in Boyle Heights, where we have Mr. Lopez and Mr. Lopez and Mr. Gertner, and teacher Andrea? Roxana. Tell me your last name?
Dueñas.
Dueñas. Would you all stand up and so we can just acknowledge you? This is our Roosevelt team. And so things the district is doing well. We've invited Mr. Lopez to be part of the committee that is rewriting the ethnic studies course so that it can be A through G approved by the Office of the President, and it can be offered to everyone. Right now, we have about 2,500 students taking ethnic studies in the system. That's at 43 different schools. And it is today an option, but we are moving towards where it becomes a requirement, right? We also know that at places like Garfield, they are including it in the history class. In places where there's ganas, like at Bravo, they're including it in the literature class. So one, we come to you as a partner in lifting our narrative and telling, and really, you know, I love the Chicano praxis, right? The meeting of theory and practice. And how do we operationalize that so that a large system that was not built for our kids can be inspired to move towards interrupting poverty instead of replicating it. So we bring with ourselves the mindset. Really, it is a decision, because we bring with ourselves the mindset that through ethnic studies, we can better know ourselves, and then we empower ourselves to engage more fully in the education system, in our society, where we want good jobs, good schools, safe parks, right? The agenda is still what folks walked out in 1968 about. We want more, we deserve better, we want to be part of the solution, and that path towards self-determination is something that is alive and well in the conversation about ethnic studies, but we are challenged. We are challenged because not every school has a Jorge Lopez who is willing to be himself as he engages with his Boyle Heights students to be their real selves. Because when we allow our students to speak, they often challenge us about the realities that are true for them that as a system we don't recognize, right? So we are learning to be trauma-informed, we are learning to be strengths-based, we are learning to really change our beliefs about the role in public education. And we are learning that when we work together, we do in fact interrupt poverty, and we create social mobility through education. So the good news for all of you is that still across all of the public sector, whatever is the challenge, education is always the solution. And like the fight here at UCLA, like the fight at the community college, that fight for who gets to decide who will fund what and who is participating in all of our sector, starting with registering to vote and moving all the way to running for office and showing up in the classroom. I will leave you with 2019 is not far away. We have the class of 2016 and 2029 in our K-12 system. And in LA Unified, where people have gotten involved and communities have been included in decisions, we have seen more students read and write, more students get to graduation. And as we move through implementing A through G and holding our students to a higher standard, because the world keeps asking that for them, we are really challenged. Today, if A through G, C or better kicks in, we go to 49% graduation instead of 70. Right? But what's a 70% graduation if we're not passing our classes and they're not rigorous? So here is our challenge, but I am addressing our community's needs with success. Gracias.
Buenos días. Good morning. Good morning again. What I'm going to be spending my time talking about this morning is a study that I worked on with Dr. Patricia Gandara, who is, of course, a faculty member here in the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies. She unfortunately couldn't be here today, but she has been, she was the principal investigator of the study in making education work for Latinas in the US. And I wanted to give you just a little bit of context about this study. It was really the product of this collaborative relationship between Dr. Gandara and the Eva Longoria Foundation. The Longoria Foundation has kind of spearheaded several programs and efforts to increase success of Latina students and moving more students from high school and into college. And so I mentioned the Longoria Foundation, who commissioned this report, because along with the foundation and the efforts of Eva Longoria, we have gotten some really amazing resources to capture the voices and the faces of Latina students, thank you, of Latina students in California. And so for me, that was one of the reasons that the study was really powerful, was because we see and we hear the stories of these young women, and that's the piece of the report that I'm going to focus on today. I should mention, this report was also conducted by, on behalf of the Civil Rights Project, who Dr. Gandara is the co-director of, along with Dr. Gary Orfield, and took the lead on putting this report together. So I wanted to start with the educational pipeline to provide some context to this discussion. The educational pipeline you'll see in the research report that you were given is there, but I wanted to walk you through to how we read this pipeline, right? It's based on 2012 data, and it breaks down the educational pipeline for the 5 major racial ethnic groups in the United States. So if we begin with white students, who are the highest attaining group in the educational pipeline, we start with 100 elementary school students entering education. And out of those 100, we have 92 women and 91 men that are graduating with a high school degree, right? Pretty good graduation rates for white students. We have about 32 women, which is the first number, and 33 men graduating with a bachelor's degree. 12 women and 13 men who are graduating with a master's degree or equivalent. And we have about 1 woman and 2 men out of those 100 elementary school students who are graduating with a doctoral degree. Now, if we look at Asian American students, we see that there's some similar, significant amount of students are graduating at the high school level. We actually have more bachelor's degrees and higher education attainment for Asian American students than white students. But I have to really quickly say a caveat about this data is that this data is not disaggregated by ethnic subgroup of Asian Americans. And so if we were to disaggregate this data, there would be vast disparities between Southeast Asians, for example, and other Asian student groups. Now, if we look at the African American student pipeline, out of those 100 students, we see still the majority of students are graduating with high school degrees. But then when we get into higher education degrees, we can see that there's a great disparity in higher education attainment for African Americans. And for Native Americans, we can see the same pattern. The majority of those graduating high school with, again, significant disparities in higher education attainment. Now, if we look at the Latina and Latino educational pipeline, we begin with those 100 students, and we see that there's about 63 women and 60 men graduating from high school. About 13 women and 11 men are graduating with a 4-year degree. 4 Latinas and 3 Latinos graduating with a master's degree or equivalent. And when we get to doctoral attainment, we're really talking about less than half, right? Less than half of a person, if we talk about this in terms of people, right, that are graduating with a doctoral degree in the Latino educational pipeline. And so I just wanted to highlight here across in high school completion and in 4-year degree completion, Latinas, although that they are faring a little bit better than their male counterparts than Latinos, is that this group is still the lowest attaining for both high school level and college level, which are the 2 segments of the pipeline that this report focuses on. So what do we know about Latinas in the US? We know, and this data reflects, that about 1/3 of Latina students don't finish high school with their class. We know that 1 out of every 4 female students across the nation are Latina. we know that the majority of all female students in the states of California, Texas, and New Mexico are Latina. And finally, we know, and this is really significant, that a mother's educational attainment is a key predictor for their child's educational attainment. And so when we look at the numbers of Latinas and Latinos graduating with four-year degrees, we see that this is an alarming statistic, right? When we know that children will most likely follow the educational attainment or close to the educational attainment of their mothers. And so if we focus in then on BA attainment, we also need to provide some context to the total population, right, in the United States to contextualize that attainment data. And so these are called parity charts, and this is another visual that's included in your report. And in this chart, we're looking at percentage of students aged 25 and older across the United States that have earned bachelor's degrees by race and ethnicity. And so again, we're looking at the 5 major racial ethnic groups. And so we begin with the highest attaining group, which are white students. And so whites are about 67% of the total population across the US, yet about 75% of those earning their share of bachelor's degrees, right? So if we reach parity with this graph, those bars should be relatively equal, right? Now, if we look at the BA attainment of Latinos compared to the population, about 12% of the population in the U.S. is Latino, but about 6% of those are earning bachelor's degrees, right? And we see some of the similar patterns for African American students. Asian American students, again, are earning higher degrees at higher rates in terms of bachelor's degrees, and Native Americans are also earning bachelor's degrees at very low levels. And so what this data is telling us is that there is an overrepresentation of BA attainment for white students in the United States, and that's this bar on the right is a bit higher. And what we see is there is severe underrepresentation of Latinos earning bachelor's degrees. So in order to reach parity, right, in terms of bachelor's degree attainment, Latinos would have to increase BA attainment by a twofold, right? And so considering mother's educational attainment and looking at the numbers of Latinos earning degrees compared to the total US population, this data is very concerning. So what I'm gonna be focusing on today, and the reason that I'm talking a little fast, I'm gonna try to slow down a bit so you can understand me, is because I really wanna highlight the stories of these women. And again, we were able to capture video interviews with these women, and it was really, hearing their stories, that for me was the most powerful part of this study, and learning what works for them, right? So our case study participants included 7 women included in these case studies that represented each segment of public higher education in California: the California Community College system, the California State University system, and the University of California. And so I wanted to introduce them to you briefly because you're going to be hearing from almost each one of them. Vanessa was a California Community College student. She grew up in South Los Angeles. She was a third-year student at her institution, and she was majoring in child development. Vanessa, and you'll hear her talk later, also became a mother in high school, and she has made it to the community college and has she has earned her degree. Alina was also at the community college. She grew up in Lawndale, California in the South Bay. She was a third-year psychology major. Lisette, this is Lisette. Lisette was a California State University student. She grew up in East Los Angeles. She was a third year, and she was a mechanical engineering major. Eva is our next student, and Eva was born in Guerrero, Mexico. She was raised, though, in Santana and lived the majority of her life in Santana. She was a third year, and she was a double major in sociology and human development. Now, Alejandra was our youngest student. She was in her first year at Cal State. She was born and raised in Santana, and she was a kinesiology major. Andrea was born in Jalisco, Mexico. She grew up in the United States for the majority of her life. She lived, her family moved a lot, so she moved to Wisconsin from Jalisco. She spent quite a bit of time in Utah, which is where she called her home, and she currently resides in the Bay Area. She is a graduate of the UC, and she majored in political science. And the final participant is Karina. Karina grew up in Rubidoux in the Inland Empire just east of us. She was a fourth-year psychology major. And so you're going to be hearing from each one of these women in the presentation today. So we know the challenges that these women and so many other young Latinas face. Some of these challenges, and the research tells us this, right, that most Latinas and Latinos are attending poor resource segregated schools. There's a lack of caring teachers in those schools and relationships with caring teachers. Often they are academically underprepared for college level coursework. They have limited college information in their schools. They experience racial and gender discrimination. And finally, 2 of the women included in this study were undocumented, and so that status, of course, presents greater barriers and challenges to academic access and success. But what we wanted to do in this study, and what the Longoria Foundation was the reason the Longoria Foundation commissioned this report, is because we know so much about challenges and barriers in the lives of Latina students. We really wanted to know, okay, so what works? What can we learn from these very amazing, resilient students? And so for the purposes of time, I don't have time to highlight all of the themes that we found. I wanted to highlight just a few for you. The full report you can find both on the Civil Rights Project website and as well as the Eva Longoria Foundation website. But I'm going to begin with a theme that we found, and that was how critical family influence was on beginning and maintaining college aspirations. And we're going to begin with Lisette, who is going to tell us some of her story.
For as long as I can remember, since I was in kindergarten, my parents just
Someone took off.
Oh, good. Yes.
For as long as I can remember, since I was in kindergarten, my parents just told me, maybe I didn't even know exactly what college was. You know, they would say it in Spanish, la universidad. But I just knew that it was something I had to do and I was going to do because that would make me have a better future.
I remember going with my sister to Dominguez Hills so she can probably just to buy books or to go to counseling offices. But I remember her giving me like a tour of the school and showing me like, oh, like this is a library, this is where you get your books, and this is where my classes are at.
We're always given books, and we're always encouraged to read. My parents read, more my mom, but we were always encouraged to do well in school, and we were praised for doing well.
My plans in terms of school was go to university, and I wanted to become a pediatrician. When I found out I was pregnant, everything kind of went blank. I didn't know what I was going to do, but my husband was like, no, I'm gonna work, you're gonna go to school, and you're gonna be someone in life.
So Vanessa, the last participant, she was amazing. She talked about how both her and her spouse had a child at a very young age in high school, and they both had college aspirations, but her and her husband made a decision that she was going to go into higher education first, get her degrees, and then he was going to continue to work to support the family, and then it was going to have his turn, right, to begin at the community college and gain his degree. And so many of these women talked about how they always knew they were going to go to college one day, and whether those aspirations came from parents, whether they came from siblings, in Vanessa's case they came from a spouse, right? They always knew that they would go to college, and that there were specific practices that they could describe that happened in their homes that supported those aspirations. Being read to, spending quality time with family on the weekends to talk about issues and challenges that were coming up, and to devise strategies to work through those challenges. And what was really interesting is that the women also actively participated in each other's lives with their family members, right? So family became the central support of a place where aspirations were maintained. Now, the next finding that I'll highlight is the significance of Latino teachers, which speaks to some of what Board Member García was describing. So yes, it's important for teachers to be caring generally, but it was also very important that these teachers were also Latino. And so we'll share some of these experiences from the women as well.
I remember the teacher I had that year, his name was Mr. García. He was a Hispanic teacher. And he would really encourage me, he would push me. Like, he would have like those reading tests that they would make you do in the classroom. And you know, he would always tell me like, oh, you got 90 words last time in 1 minute, let's see if you could do more this time, like things like that.
My AP Spanish teacher in high school was very supportive of me, and she was very encouraging, and she was the one that also talked to me about going to college. My parents felt more welcomed by her, and they felt like they were being more involved in my education. And I guess just because she spoke Spanish, and she She also came from an immigrant parent background, and she was a teacher now.
My counselor was Mr. Pina, and he was Hispanic, and I felt like I bonded more with him. He was born in Mexico as well, and I just felt like they had a lot of things in common with my parents and his parents. How he started off in a low-income family. He just worked himself up, and he's a counselor, and he said he was doing really well with his life, and he's proud of where he was at, and I hope I can be the same way one day too.
So these educators, these Latina and Latino educators in the lives of these young women, they served as institutional agents and they served as role models, but they also served as these very critical sources of support and encouragement and information, right, that propelled them through their high school experiences and transitions to college, which is important for any teacher, right, is to provide those resources. But there was also feeling this cultural connection to their teachers that enabled them to see themselves in these other Latina and Latino professionals. That was very important. The third theme that I thought was really interesting was the significance of high school mathematics courses, having access to advanced mathematics and having support to do well in those classes. And so Lisette is going to start talking about her experience and is really where she began to develop aspirations to become a mechanical engineer.
My ninth grade year in the summer, I took summer school for geometry to advance because my teacher saw that, I was good at math. I started off my ninth grade year with trigonometry, and then from there I went on to pre-calculus and then calculus, AB and BC.
And there was 4 women in our AP calculus class, and in a class of probably like 20. And those were the kids who all wanted to do engineering. And all the women, we all sat together and we all supported each other through math, and it was very important to have that support group of just women, even though there wasn't many of us.
So having access to these high-level math courses was really a key element in placing these women along a college pathway that then opened up other opportunities to more advanced courses in their high school careers. The next theme, second to last theme that I'll describe is extracurricular involvement. And so all of the women were involved in extracurricular activities. Interestingly, it was mostly in athletics. And so they weren't only involved in these activities, but often took leadership roles in whatever these groups were in terms of the extracurricular activities that they were involved.
Being in the soccer team helped me through my high school, because that was kind of my motivation, because if you wanted to be in the team, you had to have good grades. So first semester I had straight A's. Second semester I'll get some B's, but still A's. I think even though if I wouldn't have had the soccer team, I still would have had good grades, but not as good, because, maybe I would have just gone home and watched a novela or something,
Being part of the sports team in cross country, it influenced me with school a lot because it kept me busy. And so my time management, I always had to deal with that. It kept me on track with, doing my homework assignments and making sure I didn't fall behind with work.
I was really involved in orchestra. It was my pride and joy, and by the time I was a senior, I got a National Orchestra Award, which was very encouraging at the end of the year. And so we were the ones really leading the orchestra. We had to set the example, and we used to tune everybody now. I didn't realize then, but those were leadership skills that I learned and I attained just from playing music, and it was something I just really, really enjoyed.
So Andrea played something like 5 different instruments, and she was also part of, there once was, I don't know if it's still here, a folklorico group here at UCLA. She was also a leader in this group. So these extracurricular activities kept these women on a college pathway, because being in these activities meant that they had to keep their grades up in order to continue to participate, right? They learned skills to be academically successful, and they gained important leadership skills, as Andrea mentioned, becoming the leaders of these group of mostly other women, right? And so it allowed them to excel in the performance of either music or athletics. So it became a source of real empowerment, right, for these women involved in these activities as well. So the final theme that I wanted to highlight was one of the most powerful for me as I was conducting these interviews is that of community advocacy and hope, is maintaining these hopes and dreams not only for themselves, but for their families and of their communities.
I kind of have like this vision where I not only want to make myself self-sufficient, but I would also want to help other people in my community be self-sufficient.
I've struggled a bit coming from a low-income community, you know, where a lot of the times students don't finish high school or just finish high school but don't go on to college. So for me, going back and giving back and showing others, especially students, you know, that don't have that in mind, you know, or don't have that support sometimes at home. If you have that motivation and you're determined to continue on with your education, then, you know, it's possible.
If you're educated, maybe then your son will be like, hey, like my mom went to college, she went somewhere, I'm gonna do the same, you know? Like with me, with my mom, she didn't go to college or say, let me do what my mom did.
So what was really amazing about Vanessa is that she, for me, counters this myth of Latinas becoming parents early on, right, and just forgetting about school or not caring about school. And in fact, through her story, we learned that having her son became a motivation for her to continue on to higher education, so that her son could one day see that his mom earned a college degree, so should I, right? So these high aspirations really translated to community advocacy. The meaning of success for these women was really intricately tied to the advancement of their families and communities, which is another powerful finding from this study. So in terms of recommendations moving forward, there were quite a few. I'm just going to highlight a couple that I highlighted through these stories. We really need to outreach to Latino parents and families, and I think Board Member Garcia also mentioned this, to validate and support their power. So they have a tremendous amount of power to influence their daughter's education. We need to, of course, recruit and retain more amazing Latino educators like those in the audience today. We need to emphasize the importance of math early in the education of Latina and Latino students, and we really need to think about developing effective pedagogical strategies that make math engaging and fun, right? It was really interesting for many of these women. They got to about middle school and they felt that they were good in all subjects, and it was middle school as this critical transition point where they began to feel that they were really struggling in math. So although they did advance to these high-level courses, it wasn't easy, right? And many of them did struggle. But we need to think about how we can improve pedagogical strategies around mathematics in particular. We need to allow and encourage opportunities for a variety of extracurricular activities for young Latinas. And finally, build on the resilience and hope and aspirations of these women. And if we can devise strategies to do this, then we ensure that these aspirations, the hope for their future, for their families, their communities, will eventually materialize. Thank you.
Hi everybody, I'm very glad I'm here with you today. I've tried to come to most of these summits and been involved in a lot of the reports that have been written. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about a manuscript that I have under review that my work specifically looks at how racialized masculinities and femininities evolve and from discourse and into practice along the Latino educational pipeline. And so for many years I've been working on looking at Latino males specifically. And so I'm sharing some thoughts that I have from a manuscript that's under review that's speaking to a lot of the policies and discussions that we're having around men and boys of color. As we know, there's been a lot of attention called to this. And so part of what my paper is about is discussing, is a Chicana feminist talkback to some of the problems that we're having and with these discussions that I feel are important for us to highlight if we really want to address this issue of Latino male educational attainment and so forth. And so as I argue that in my paper that policymakers up to, from Obama down are arguing that we have a men and boys of color problem. And so my paper argues that we don't really have this problem, nor do we have really a problem that's solely focused on the hypermasculinity of black and brown men. What we really have essentially is a patriarchy problem. And that is very much missing from all of our discussions as we trickle that down to policy and practice. So for those of you who have been in the loop, we know that Obama called for an initiative called My Brother's Keeper last February of 2014. And similarly, California has had these discussions prior, initiating initiatives around brown boys and men of color. There's an alliance for boys and men of color that include state agencies, many governmental actors, nonprofit organizations, and they've done really great work through research, through practice, and conversations, especially conversations around trauma and health of young men of color. And so many scholars have kind of come and activists, especially women of color activists, have come out speaking about some of the problems with some of the discussions that we're having. Not that all these organizations and efforts are problematic, but that there's been an absence of this discussion, that this is not a new problem. This is something that has, and that's what I'm going to share with you, and that's what my paper goes over, is how I did a content analysis of a lot of initiatives that have come out since the early 1900s, specifically talking about immigrant youth of color, including white ethnics at the beginning of last century up till today. And in my paper, I discuss how this discourse hasn't really changed. The technologies of oppression have changed. And that's what we need to be strategic about. And unless we really address an issue of patriarchy, we are not really going to make any changes in this so-called crisis. And so part of what folks argue, especially with these initiatives like My Brother's Keeper, is that if we have a gender-exclusive conversation without a discussion of patriarchy and how it particularly affects people of color, we minimize the consequences of structural inequalities that affect, in our case, Latinos generally, with two competing narratives. One is that it characterizes male levels of achievement as a reflection of their own failings. It reinforces the relative silence about Latinas and that they are faring well. And I'll show you this through an example of how Black women are also omitted from discussion and the repercussions of that in my next slide. The other suggests that racism targets Latino men especially and acknowledges the role of racism, but it narrows the scope of its impact on Latinos in general, especially women. And so the convergence of these narratives creates a research and policy environment inhospitable to those who understand educational disparity as a legacy of unwarranted racial power with consequences for both men and women. And so in response to My Brother's Initiative and other initiatives around surrounding boys and men of color, we see a response from a lot of folks. And so this hashtag here that says "Why We Can't Wait" specifically addresses the omission of Black women in these discussions. And so here you see something like my brothers and I have always standed together. We are a community, and communities progress together. And so this policy environment that narrows and these responses are disproportionately subjected to zero tolerance policies, high stakes testing, crumbling public school infrastructures, and curricular choices that fail to meet minimum requirements for their state's most selective institutions. These are conditions that undermine achievements and opportunities for both boys and girls. And so in my work, I raised the question of how can we do research and then talk about policy and practice in a way that addresses symbolic forms of violence across these spectrums and how it affects boys and girls differently, but under similar systems of oppression. And so in the work that I did specifically for this paper, I looked at how, as I mentioned, patriarchy is the problem. So today we have this issue that, and sorry, it's very kind of loud and, a little offensive, but that's what I do. That's how I am. I don't hide it ever. And so we have this picture that shows us, part of how this problem is discussed in the media, in educational circles, that informs things like zero. Thank you, board member. Zero tolerance policy. But as I mentioned, this isn't new. So this is a picture that comes out of Mirosalva Chavez Garcia's book, States of Delinquency, that looks at young boys, specifically Mexican boys, that attended the Nell School at the turn of the early 19th century. It was a reformatory school where boys were sent to, subjected to IQ testing, sometimes subjected to sterilization. And if you look at the discourse about how these young men are talked about, it's not so different about how young men of color are talked about today. And when you look at how, and the content analysis I did of these programs, if you look at how many of these organizations, policy agent, and other agents talk about, it really reduces the problem to cultural values, right? It's very much rooted in culturally deficit thinking. The way that they frame the problem, the way that they execute their policy, the way and practice, and the everyday interactions that they have with young men. And so all of these conversations are in absence of a really thorough and structural analysis of patriarchy. And so a lot of our research on Latino men, I didn't put data here, but I tried to sum it up. Tells us that Latino boys have a lower interest in studying, and they don't necessarily ask for help. They have high rates of suspension, disability classification, and are less likely to be targeted or classified as gifted and talented. And in terms of their aspirations, the research summarizes that Latino boys have lower educational goals and a less optimistic future outlook than their Latina counterparts. And in terms of their trajectories, they are more likely to be pushed out of school, as the pipeline shows, and traced into low-paying work. And so, as I keep reiterating, this isn't new. This is what has always been occurred. However, it's been spotlighted as a crisis, that we have a crisis of hypermasculinity. And so here I want to highlight something that Danny shared with me when I was a graduate student of a teaching magazine that was supposed to show mostly Anglo teachers how the cultural values. So here I'm highlighting that whenever we talk about this crisis of Latino students, it's very much deduced to their cultural values and how their cultural values don't align with what is expected from them at school, and hence this is why they fail. And we also have to take note of how much these values, this language is very much coded and gendered. Right, gendered at the same time as much as it is racialized. And so I'm just going to go over a couple. In this magazine, it shows certain concepts that are to be found in school, how Anglo families, what their values are, what Mexican American values are, and this is from the 1970s. I don't know if I said that, and how then a teacher who is not from this community, who has not worked with these students, is what they're expected to find. And what I want you to think about is how much have we evolved since then, as teachers, as educators, as policymakers, and even as our own students, as they're seeing themselves. And so I'm just going to highlight a couple. So for example, when it talks about the role of the father, the research, or this manual tells teachers that in the Mexican American home, there's machismo, that the father is dominant, and that in the classroom, for the most part, these students are going to miss male authority, and especially looking at the teaching force at this time, mostly white female teachers, right? And so this is what you're expected to find. And we know that this is conceptualized and perceived and reinforced with consistent media images that we see of our families and of our youth. And this is translated into research and practice and how we train teachers, and how teachers come in with certain, many teachers and other school agents come in with these perceptions that is matched up with these other factors, such as police coming into schools and working with our students. This other value here that shows us the home environment, it highlights that these youth, male and female, but very much coded, especially on males, is that they often have aggressive behavior. They lack necessary experiences for conceptual development. And hence here, their views on education is that they're apathetic in school. There's few successful experiences and may become a dropout. And so what I want to call to attention is raising the questions about how we're training our teachers, right? How we're training our teachers as not just culturally about who these communities are, but also how these things become coded as race and gendered practices. In the work that I've done with Latino males over time, this very much becomes apparent as they grow up in terms of how they're experiencing their interactions with teachers, with school officials, and even in their own communities, and how then they start to internalize and also react to these labels. And so a lot of these young men start to build very low aspirations when they have things like personal problems in schools, personal family issues, as many of us do, and they start to lag behind instead of a teacher really kind of understanding the context, as we saw in the recent video of what happened in South Carolina with the young female who had just lost her parents, was in foster care, etc., was having a very bad day, was being defiant, that had to be probably addressed, but not in the way that we saw it being addressed. But many times what I saw in the research that I did with young men is when they had personal issues such as experiencing poverty, family separation, divorce, deportation, instead of asking what's going on, let me talk to your parents, it falls into that culturally deficit rubric of, is probably going to become a dropout, right? It's not just an issue, right? The student becomes erased, right? The student becomes part of a cultural paradigm that this is expected, this is what's supposed to happen anyway, rather than there being a critical intervention and an understanding about what that young person is facing. And so when we're thinking about things like policy and practice, I like to follow Richard Valencia's model about what inequity looks like in our schools. And so he says that we have to take into consideration these institutional processes and the personal attitudes or cultural values of actors. And so this together has serious effects and outcomes. And so if we really want to talk about this so-called crisis about Latino males, we have to really unpack what patriarchy is, how it's not addressed in our curriculum. So we're at a critical point of implementing things like ethnic studies. But if you look at ethnic studies curriculum, and I've taught in Chicano studies, when we talk about gendered issues, they're very peripheral, right? It's, let's talk about Chicanas week 10. Right? Then we'll talk about patriarchy. These things, let's talk about LGBT folks week 11, right? If we get to it. And so these are conversations that we have to have integrated in our curriculum throughout. If we're talking about irrelevant pedagogy, we have to talk about patriarchy as much as we have to talk about racism, classism, and other forms of issues. And this is the absence of what I find in a lot of the organizations and the folks that work with these youth, is not challenging patriarchy for the fear of also coming off as culturally deficit against Latino cultures. But in general, like I said, it's not an issue of hypermasculinity within Black and Latino cultures. It's an issue of patriarchy and how that becomes transcended into just being an issue of Latino and Black male and their cultures. And so we have to look at these issues of how we're addressing this at meso levels of policy, when it comes to curriculum, when it comes to standardized testing. How do these young men see their lives, their gendered lives, as much as their race and class lives? And the micro interactions between students, between teachers. When I was a gender education program coordinator, I saw many times, very heteronormative, heterosexist language that wasn't addressed by the mentors and the actors or really discussed. They were peripheral to the overall agenda of trying to have these young men see just issues, really structural issues deduced to just racism and classism. And that's what I want to basically leave us with.
I guess we have a chance for maybe one or two questions if anybody has a question. And there's a mic up here if you want to come up to the mic, because we have to make a quick transition to the next panel. But anyone? Yes. I'm not sure if you need the mic, but.
I'll ask from here. So Maria, I was just wondering, So, two questions. One, I noticed that they had the Mexican American, separated from Chicano, and I wondered if they talked about why that separation happened, and if you're kind of doing an analysis around that. And two, just like, I hear the patriarchy critique, and I think it's really important. I think it's often left out. But are we saying that patriarchy in the Chicano community or amongst men of color is reason why they're faring less, or is it patriarchy across the country, patriarchy in our society in general that leads men who are trying to be loyal to patriarchy, they end up failing in patriarchy, in other words, I think. I think that's one of the things that I'm kind of hearing, but I want to know if that's the way you see it.
Yeah, so in terms of the slide, I mean, I can't find the original, so I'm not sure how they come to that, so I'm guessing it's like Mexico. I mean, again, it's 1970s, these operations, the chart, isn't really defined, so I'm not really clear on what, and so they're probably also appropriating some of the language at the time of like, oh, these are the youth are Chicanos, right, but the families.
It's getting worse in the chart, if that's what
so this is what happens, and this is what you're going to expect in your classroom. But to answer your second part of what I'm trying to argue it, and I have a very hard time articulating at times without trying to have having my argument deduced to very culturally deficit arguments. But I'm arguing we have a structural problem of patriarchy, but many times it's deduced to what's wrong with black men, what's wrong with Latino men, and so we need to have these kind of dual conversations, be very real about, yes, patriarchy exists in our communities. If we are looking at Chicano communities, it's not just the patriarchy, or Latino communities, it's not just the patriarchy that we experience, that it's racist and sexist in the United States, of how we're framed as Latino males, but also, how do sometimes how does our culture also teach us patriarchy, right? And so we need to have these very critical discussions. And so many times when I look at organizations or folks that want to work with youth, it's that conversation isn't there. Right? The conversation isn't there. For example, I was in an organization, participating in an organization many years ago, where the young men were talking about their mothers, especially single mothers, as these victims, right? As victims. And then they were having these very horrible conversations about women. Right, and so about the women that they're dating, and there was no intervention of having those discussions, right? So if we really want to actual issues of inequality, but not just leave it at cultural values, or not just leave it as, oh, we're stigmatized as men of color, we're more targeted by police, etc. But how do we also perpetuate, how do we also kind of resolve these issues within our own communities without excluding those structural conversations? I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments from the audience? Yes.
I have a question for Mónica García about the curriculum. Would it be only based in California, or maybe do you see it in another 20 or 30 years nationwide?
Do I see the need for ethnic studies?
No, as in maybe striving for the ethnic studies, not only maybe in California, but nationwide, so in every state.
So I think we know the population of people of color continues to grow, and it is something that everyone has to be a learner about, and systems have to learn, right? So these two presentations really speak to the scholarship piece that doesn't automatically translate into the policy piece, right? So do I see us needing to all learn more about each other? The answer is yes. Do I see the country moving in that direction? Not right now, but I'm an optimist. So we will. It really depends. It really depends around people taking an active leadership role across the board. So you see it right now along the coasts and in the South, but the real heart of the United States in the middle, there's a conversation.
Follow-up?
So that kind of leads to another question. These talks you know, they should kind of be also targeting not the not just faculty, but maybe community, non-university, you know, so like maybe these talks, should they be held in a, you know, bigger auditorium, focused on maybe not just high school students, but maybe elementary school students?
So I'm not going to speak for the organizers, but I think I was invited for the K-12 perspective. And I want to say that you're right about we have to do this over and over and over again. I, for one, am pleased that this conversation takes place at UCLA, because it's really important that UCLA accepts this part of their responsibility in impacting multiple systems, right? And you're right, when UCLA has a school in Pico Union, Koreatown area, the K-12 Bruin School, and that I think got more people accepted to UCLA than any other place. But the idea is that we have, for the Latino community and for some of educational justice, social justice, economic justice, we have to make the bridges happen, and it is in our best interest for that to be so. If everybody wants to stay in their place, then we perpetuate what does not work for our folks, right? So we need to have, you're absolutely right, that's why I said we have the class of 2029 in our system today. And so our decisions and our actions and whether or not we address some of these questions absolutely have an impact on that.
One last question.
Well, I'm actually going to, I don't think we have time for any more questions. What I'm going to suggest is that we have a concluding session at 4:30 at the end of the day today. So if there are additional questions, please note them down so you don't forget them. And this session is actually dedicated to a Q&A for any of the presenters that had a chance to present today. So I want to be respectful of time also for our second panel. So we're going to take a quick 2-minute break and transition to our second panel. So thank you.